Islamic Jurisprudence by Salih Fawzan. This is the chapter on things ritual impurity prohibits doing. There are some deeds which Muslims are prohibited to perform unless they are in a state of purity, due to the greatness and loftiness of these deeds. What follows is a discussion of these deeds accompanied with related proofs, so as to familiarize the reader with such deeds, and not to perform any of them unless he or she is in a state of proper purity. Furthermore, there are deeds that one in a state of ritual impurity, be it major or minor, is prohibited to do. On the other hand, there are some deeds specifically prohibited only for those in a state of major ritual impurity. Deeds prohibited for one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity. Number 1. Touching the glorious Quran book. It is prohibited for one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity to touch the glorious book of the Quran, unless with something that prevents direct contact. For Allah exalted be He says, "None touch it except the purified." That's from the Quran, Al-Waqi'ah chapter, and it's verse 79. That is, it is prohibited to touch it unless by those purified from minor and major ritual impurity, according to the opinion that the words "the purified" in the verse refer to human beings. However, there are some exegetes who state that the words "the purified" in the aforesaid verse refer to the noble angels. Even if the verse is interpreted that the words "the purified" refer to the angels, they also refer to human beings by implication. To illustrate it, as mentioned in the letter sent by Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, to the people of Yemen, as narrated by Amr ibn Hazm, that, quote, "No one should touch the book of Quran unless they are pure," unquote. That's related by Al-Nasi and other compilers of hadith with a continuous chain of transmitters. In addition, Ibn al-Bar said, quote, "The hadith is more likely to be mutawatir," which means continuously recurrent, a hadith, as it is commonly accepted by scholars. Shaykh al-Islam, or Ibn Taymiyyah, states that the prohibition of touching the book of Quran while being in a state of major or minor ritual impurity is agreed upon by the 4 Imams. Ibn Hubayra also states in his book entitled Al-Ifsah, Enunciation is the English title. He states, quote, "They, the 4 Imams, agree that it is impermissible for one in a state of ritual impurity to touch the book of Quran. However," end quote. However, one in a state of ritual impurity is allowed to hold the book of Quran in a cover or a bag so as not to touch it directly. Similarly, one in a state of major ritual impurity is allowed to read or browse through the book without touching it. And another thing you're not allowed to do in a state of ritual impurity is offering prayer, neither obligatory or supererogatory prayer. Scholars uniformly agree that it is impermissible for one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity to perform prayer at all, be it obligatory or supererogatory, provided that one is able to purify oneself. This is because Allah exalted be He says, quote, "O you who have believed, when you rise to perform prayer, wash your faces and your forearms to the elbows, wipe your heads, wash your feet to the ankles, and if you are in a state of janaba, then purify yourself." That's from Quran chapter Al-Ma'idah, verse 6. Besides, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, as related by Muslim and other compilers of hadith, quote, "Allah does not accept a prayer without purification," end quote. He, peace be upon him, also said, quote, "Allah does not accept the prayer of anyone who, if he passes wind, urine, or stool until he performs ablution, washing before prayer." The above hadith shows that it is impermissible for one to pray while being in a state of impurity, provided one is able to purify oneself. This is the prayer offered by one in a state of impurity is invalid, whether it is performed in such a state while one is aware of the ruling or not, whether one performs it inattentively or intentionally. If one is aware of the ruling and other prayers intentionally, offers prayer intentionally, one is regarded as a sinner who has undergone discretionary punishment, who needs to undergo discretionary punishment. But if one is unaware of it and offers prayer inattentively, one in the case is not regarded as a sinner, yet one's prayer is deemed invalid. Also, in a state of ritual impurity, you're not allowed to perform tawaf, which is circumambulating the Kaaba. It is impermissible for one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity to perform tawaf. For the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Tawaf is considered a prayer. The difference is that Allah made it unlawful to speak during it." End quote. The Prophet, peace be upon him, used to perform ablution before performing tawaf. It was authentically narrated that he, peace be upon him, forbade menstruating women to perform tawaf until she purified herself. All the above shows that one in a state of minor or major ritual impurity is prohibited in performing tawaf until one purifies oneself. Among the proofs is that one in a state of major ritual impurity is prohibited to perform tawaf in the following Quranic verse. Quote, "O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying, or in a state of janaba," which is having just been with women or men intimately, except those passing through a place of prayer until you have washed your whole body. Quran chapter Nisa verse 43. The verse means that one should never enter a mosque while they are in state of major ritual impurity except for those who are passing through it on their way. Since one is in a state of janaba, is prohibited to stay in the mosque, then with greater reason one on the same state is prohibited from performing tawaf. In a nutshell, the above mentioned deeds are prohibited to be performed by one in a state of ritual impurity, whether minor or major. Deeds performed for one in a state of major ritual impurity in particular. As for the deeds specifically prohibited from one in a state of major ritual impurity, they are as follows. Reciting Quran. One in a state of major ritual impurity is prohibited to recite the Quran according to the following hadith related by Al-Tirmidhi and other compilers of hadith on the authority of Ali ibn Abu Talib, and may Allah be pleased with him. Quote, "Nothing prevented him, the Prophet, peace be upon him, from reciting the Quran other than being in a state of janaba, major ritual impurity." The wording of Tirmidhi of the aforesaid hadith is as follows. He, peace be upon him, used to recite the Quran for us unless he was in a state of major janaba. End quote. This proves that it is prohibited for a person in a state of major ritual impurity to recite the Quran. The same ruling applies to both menstruating women and the woman in a state of postnatal bleeding. Yet some scholars, such as Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, maintain that it is impermissible for a menstruating woman to recite the Quran for fear of forgetting it. End quote. Ibn Taymiyyah said it is permissible for menstruating women to recite the Quran for fear of forgetting it. It is permissible for one in a state of major ritual impurity to use the wording of Quran with no intention of recitation